Our guest on the podcast today is Luke Epplin, author of Our Team, The Epic Story of Four Men and the World Series That Changed Baseball. Luke, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Luke, this is a wonderful book about a very monumental season with the Cleveland Indians, who actually are just in the process of changing their name. But your book focuses largely on the 1948 team, and this is the epic story of the four men, and these four men are Larry Doby, Satchel, Paige, Bob Feller, and Bill Veeck, all legendary names in the sport. What was your impetus to start researching this book?
Well, it's kind of a roundabout process. I'm from near the St. Louis area. My dad is a huge Cardinals fan, and so therefore I am as well. But my grandfather on my dad's side was a huge St. Louis Browns fan. St. Louis used to have two major teams, the Cardinals, which were usually pretty good, and the Browns, which were usually pretty terrible. The Browns left St. Louis in the mid-'50s, but I still grew up hearing stories about the Browns from my grandpa. And if you hear any stories about the Browns, you're going to hear the name Bill Veeck, who was the last owner of that team. He did some of the most notorious sort of stunts and promotions for the Browns that he is now known for, including bringing Eddie Goodell, a little person, to the plate, among others. And so I really wanted to write about Veeck, and particularly that sort of story about the Browns, and sort of honor my family tradition right there. But as I was researching Veeck in the archives, I kept seeing these other names that were coming to the forefront from when he owned the Indians before the Browns, and that was Larry Doby, Satchel Paige, Bob Feller. And I kind of noticed how you took these four individuals, two white, two black. So you have like Bill Veeck as a more sort of progressive-minded white owner. You have Bob Feller as perhaps more of a traditionalist white superstar. Then you have the two black players on the other side who were 17 years apart in age. Satchel Paige is much older than Larry Doby, and so they sort of represent different eras of the Negro Leagues. And I thought to myself that you could tell a really interesting and slightly undertold story about integration through these four figures, and sort of use these figures to stand in for sort of aspects of integration at that time.
You make an excellent point there, because the integration story has been told quite a bit, but this team in particular hasn't been zeroed in on. It always seems historically like Doby has been overlooked in this process, and people forget, and I don't want to say forget, they always talk about Jackie, but don't mention Larry. And Larry, here he was integrating the American League with no time in the minors, right? Jackie had that whole season in the minors, and a lot of the guys the Dodgers had brought in before him, they all put through the minor league system. But Veeck chose to bring Doby straight from Newark to the majors. How do you think that impacted Doby and parts of this story?
Yeah, I think that you raised several good points there. One is that we do tend to tell sort of the story of integration almost as the story of Jackie Robinson. Integration now sort of doubles as the story of Robinson and Branch Rickey. And Larry Doby came into Major League Baseball only 11 weeks after Jackie Robinson had integrated the Brooklyn Dodgers. And as you said, Doby's process was much different than the process that Jackie Robinson went through. Robinson spent a year in Montreal in the minor leagues. He kind of had time to adjust, to acclimate to all white spaces, and to sort of, his teammates too had time to sort of wrap their minds around the process that was coming to fruition. Robinson is 5 years older than Doby. He was kind of a more known name from being a superstar at UCLA on their football team during his college years. And so he already had a national profile. Larry Doby, on the other hand, was kind of not known to anybody in white baseball. He played for the Newark Eagles. He was 23 years old. Bill Veeck wanted to integrate the Indians quickly after the Dodgers did, but he did not want to send Doby to the minor leagues for a couple of reasons. Namely, the Indians clubs were in the South and in Baltimore, which was a city that was notoriously hostile to black athletes at that time. And also just because Veeck thought that Doby could handle the pressures of coming right in, that Negro League baseball gave him his preparation and that he could kind of skip straight to the majors. And so Doby's journey was so unlike Jackie Robinson. He played a game for the Newark Eagles on July 4th, 1947, boarded a train in Newark, went to Chicago where the Indians were playing the White Sox, and the very next day he was on the Indians roster. In other words, he journeyed literally overnight from the Negro Leagues to the Major Leagues, and the shock was tremendous. He had a very tough time adjusting, and even Veeck would sort of recognize that it was a very tough leap for Doby to go right to the majors like that.
You know, and you chronicle his struggle really well in the book, and it's definitely an important part of the story, but not, you know, the only part of the story, because, you know, as people will see, the leap that Doby made from 40 to 748 was incredible, but I want to save that for people who read the book. We also talk about Bob Feller, and, you know, Feller had a lot to do with the integration of this through his barnstorming tours, and I guess this is how also we can start bringing in Satchel Paige into the fold. How important was Bob Feller's tour that he did with Satchel Paige to maybe making this connection happen only a few years later on the Indians?
It was tremendously important, and I think in a way sort of undervalued right now. Bob Feller was somebody who was a phenom since he was a young kid. He exhibited a rare talent even as a boy, so much so that his father cleared off a portion of his farmland in central Iowa and built him a baseball diamond right there, kind of like an original Field of Dreams. He makes the Indians at age 17, and in his very first start ever in the majors, he ties the American League record for strikeouts in a game. 4 starts after that, he ties the Major League mark for strikeouts in a game. What I find interesting is that Feller then comes back to Iowa as a 17-year-old kid, and the very first person he faces right then is Satchel Paige, who is barnstorming through the middle of the country in October, and they face off against each other in 1936 for the first time. They each throw 3 innings. I think Feller strikes out 8 and Paige 7. And there's this sort of recognition that this sort of rivalry between them could be not only sort of fruitful competitively, but fruitful from a box office standpoint. These were 2 men who were very conscious about what they can gain financially from their arms, from their names, from their narratives, from everything about them. They did such a great job of sort of cultivating their stories and their legends and using that as a leverage for financial means. So when Feller comes back from the war in 1946, he's lost a lot of money from having been in military service, and he figures that he wants to sort of try to make back as much as he can, and he can do that through barnstorming. So he plans this elaborate coast-to-coast tour with airplanes and stadiums and the whole fixings, and he's doing it all by himself. No promoters, no agents, nothing like that. And he knows that if he wants to draw the crowds that he needs to make back the money and to make this tour financially successful, he needs the right opponent, and there's no one else better than Satchel Paige. And what's important about this tour is not only is it helping Paige and Feller in terms of financial things, but right as integration is happening, this tour, which would draw just 250,000 fans, is exposing white fans to the talents of the black players on Satchel Paige's team, showing fans that otherwise probably wouldn't have seen them how good they are, how talented they are. This is a club that is consistently beating Feller's team. So it goes a long way toward giving these players the exposure they need among fans and major league executives who were perhaps skeptical of integration.
The tour was also a financial boon, if I remember correctly. I'd spoken with Mickey Vernon before he passed, and he had spoke about how, you know, he was going to make more off of this than like, or that, you know, like our Musial was going to make more off of this than like his World Series check. How much did Feller have to outlay, and then did he turn a profit at the end of the tour?
Well, it's a little bit hazy, the finances, but it is rumored that Feller spent close to $50,000 of his own money on this tour, and he would need to make about sort of, that much plus a little bit more to turn a profit. Feller walks away from that tour having made more than $80,000 in it, and then you kind of couple that with his salary and all the other things that he has cultivating at that time. a syndicated newspaper column, a radio show, all these endorsements. He makes over $150,000 in 1946, which would make him the highest individually paid baseball player in a season up to that point. He breaks Babe Ruth's mark. And what you would also mention with Mickey Vernon there was important because Stan Musial ends up competing on Feller's team, but he was also in the World Series in 1946 against the Red Sox. And people are sort of saying that because Musial's winner's check was only, I can't remember the exact number now, but it was about $5,000 to $6,000 or something like that. And so there's this sort of idea that Feller was paying about that or even more to the superstars on the team. So a player for the majors could potentially make more barnstorming than playing in the World Series. So Major League executives became very concerned that you could possibly see the impossible happen, which would be a player might be like, I don't really want to be in the World Series. I'd rather be barnstorming. I can make more money off of that. And so the very next year, the league cracks down on Feller and limits the time that he can barnstorm, and a lot of that was fear-based.
Yes, and Feller, being the quintessential businessman, was always looking for different ways to work his name to fill his pockets, and that's something that was consistent throughout his career. I mean, I met him really late in life, and he was doing the show circuit for as long as he physically could, and would sell you stuff right on the spot. He knew how to promote himself, but I think it started from these tours.
Yeah, absolutely. It started also from being a kid on a farm. He learned a lot from his dad. He was one of the most forward-thinking farmers in that area. He was one of the first to have a tractor in central Iowa. He was buying up farmland during the Depression when other farmers were losing their land. He really learned a lot. But speaking about what you just said, there's an article from the 1970s, and I believe it was from the Los Angeles Times, although I can't quite remember, about a writer following around Feller, and he was just kind of traveling around to various minor league teams during the baseball season in the 70s and putting up a card table with a sign that said, Bob Feller, autographs $10. And I remember the writer kind of implying that this was undignified of a Hall of Famer to be doing this, that a Hall of Famer should not be sort of stooping down, setting up card tables at these places and kind of shilling his autograph. And that was just, Feller was ahead of the game. I mean, now everybody does stuff like that. I mean, Feller is sort of continually inventing streams of revenue for Major League Baseball players to do basically through the end of his life.
And then so if we take Satchel Paige, we can't really say he's a mirror image because society was much different then, but Satch was notorious for barnstorming even mid-season. Like, he would jump teams if the offer was better. Like, he would leave the Monarchs and barnstorm or, go to other places. What did Paige face, during all of this? Because his career was largely barnstorming outside of Negro League play, and he was playing throughout the winter in different foreign countries, right? So what did you find out about his experience that maybe ran somewhat parallel to Feller's, if at all?
Well, I think that for as much as we're talking about Feller as being a sort of consummate businessman / major leaguer, I think that Paige was even more so. I mean, you have to imagine, Paige came up as a kid in the depths of the Deep South, where Jim Crow and segregation reigned supreme. He learned how to sort of make a buck from an early age at a train station there, where he used to gather bags of passengers. He would sort of build this contraption where he could put the bags on a big sort of stick that he could carry on his shoulders, so he could carry more and earn more than through that contraption. And so people called him Satchel because he carried so many satchels. I mean, and that's just sort of the sort of inkling of the sort of businessman he would become. By the 1930s, he sort of works his way through the Negro Southern Leagues to the Negro Leagues and starts kind of spinning a legend about him. It's his whole sort of persona and personality is something that fans just want to come out and see. He was the sort of player that could sort of slow walk to the mound with a sort of deadpan, blank expression on his face and would send crowds into a frenzy. He just sort of had this charisma and this way of sort of utilizing his narrative and persona to draw people to the ballpark, so much so that the teams that he was on, the Pittsburgh Crawfords and whatnot, would sort of lease him out to other teams that needed a boost. And Paige would just pitch 3 innings, collect paychecks, collect gate receipts and things like that, to the point where in the mid-30s, whenever the Negro Leagues were really kind of in dire financial straits, if not collapse, Paige was making about as much as any white superstar in the major leagues. Reporters used to ask Paige, why don't you cross over into the majors or something? And Paige would say, well, they can't pay me enough. And in some ways, he kind of had a point. He turned himself into a one-man franchise, and this is important, without the advantages that Bob Feller had through, his own sort of whiteness. He did not sort of have those endorsement deals. He was not able to get a radio show or a syndicated column. Instead, he sort of built himself up into this one-person show in a way that I think that he might be the most entrepreneurial athlete that this country has ever seen. I mean, what he was able to do was just extraordinary.
Yes, and against the circumstances, which, you so expertly described, just about, the Jim Crow segregation and the opportunities that Feller had from being a major league player and a white major league player at that, as opposed to, Paige, while not saying there weren't opportunities in the black communities, right? There was a lot of things that were purposely shut off to him because that's the way the country was operating at the time. So now here you have Bill Veeck, and he's trying to put together the Indians, right? He had just, purchased the team, a few years prior, and here he is. He's trying to build interest, build a winner in Cleveland. How did he get all these forces together, at this time to turn them into a World Series team?
Well, I think that we were sort of talking about Bob Feller and Satchel Paige's tremendous entrepreneurial prowess, and I think we also have to talk about Bill Veeck. He was a man who grew up around baseball. His dad was the president of the Chicago Cubs. He learned the game from a very early age and how to operate in the front office. But unlike a lot of baseball executives at the time who sort of really focused on fans that were big baseball fanatics and didn't sort of think very much about sort of promotions and giveaways and things like that, they thought it sort of sullied the dignity of the national pastime. Bill Veeck was somebody who thought that competitive play on the field could coexist with sort of theatrical interludes throughout. So whether that was before the game when he would shoot off fireworks or sort of have clowns on the field, or between innings whenever, people would sort of dance around or things like that. He really wanted fans to come out and have a good time, even if the team lost. And he also thought that you could sort of cultivate a much larger fan base that way. You could interest families, and he really catered to women through ladies' days and things like that. And he felt that if you just kind of got them to the ballpark and made them think they were going to see something interesting, whether it was either in the game or in the sort of, extracurricular stuff that happened around the game, that they would keep coming back to see more and more and more. And so when he comes to Cleveland, this is a team that has been very badly under-promoted, and he just kind of starts like a hurricane, and the fans really respond to him, so much so that he's drawing 60, 70,000 fans to games in that giant municipal stadium of Cleveland consistently. So he kind of creates this frenzy, and then he has this tremendous baseball mind where he is making shrewd trades, like bringing Joe Gordon over from the Yankees and getting Larry Doby and Satchel Paige and things like that. He is building a roster on the fly, so much so that within 2 years, the Indians, who were in 6th place when he bought the team, are competing for a pennant.
And, when he brings in Satchel, the attendance figures are through the roof. Standing room only. People, outside of the stadium. What kind of a boon was that for the team on the field, and then also from the front office side?
Well, there's a couple of things to consider here. So in 1948, the Indians start off the season extremely strong. They're sort of running in first place throughout the first half of the season. But the Indians had always traditionally been a franchise that started out strong and then sort of faded as the summer went along. Teams like the Yankees and the Red Sox would often pass them. And in 1948, the Yankees and the Red Sox were kind of right there with them. And so Veeck sort of realized that in order for the Indians to not fall into the similar pattern that the team often did, they needed more pitching. And the options were sort of few, and Veeck sort of knew the power of Satchel Paige. He'd been following his career for decades, and thought that he could really help the team. A lot of baseball people at that time, whether writers or other front office people, thought that Veeck was doing this as a stunt, just another sort of way to draw fans in the way that Veeck often did. But Veeck was adamant that this was an honest and earnest attempt to help the Indians on the field. Of course, the fact that Paige kind of ignited a mania around the country didn't hurt, and like Bill Veeck certainly, appreciated that. I mean, these were sort of white fans who, even if they knew nothing about Negro League baseball, had heard the name Satchel Paige. Paige had been profiled in places like the Saturday Evening Post, Time magazine, things like this. He was the one black player that white fans knew about. And so when he came into the league, he was 42 years old, and it was almost like a mythic figure had come out and come into the league. And fans just really wanted to see them, so much so that they were literally tearing down the turnstiles to try to see him play. When Paige was in Chicago at Kaminsky Park, a park that held about 50,000, nearly 70,000 people squeezed into that park, so much so that they were underneath the bleachers trying to get a glimpse of him. I mean, it was almost like a rock star sort of setting. He was something else.
It's almost surreal to hear that now in 2021, because I don't think we've had that level of anticipation for a player in quite some time. That, it was a must-see event. Obviously, television has gotten in the way of a lot of that, but I think for people to realize like their only way to get a view of Paige was to be at the game, it kind of puts some of that hysteria into context.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fans might have seen him on the barnstorming trail. Fans could have obviously seen him in Negro League games if they wanted to. And Paige would often say in his memoirs that by the time the 40s came around, they were drawing about half and half white and black fans, because fans had known about Paige and just wanted to go out and see him. But this was something different. This was Paige in a major league stadium against major league batters, something that everybody that had basically seen Paige pitch from the early 30s had said that he was not only major league worthy, but would be a major league superstar. And now here he is at age 42, coming into the league essentially as a major league rookie. And I mean, you have to understand how badly this could have gone. Because what if Satchel Paige, who at age 42, understandably didn't have really what it took anymore to face major league batters? A lot of players at age 42 don't. And so that would have affected his legacy. It would have affected his ability to make money on the barnstorming trail. They would have been like, oh, he's overrated or
he's
something
done,
like that.
yeah.
But he didn't. He wins 6 games and is hurling shutouts against these teams. I mean, he was everything that Bill Veeck wanted him to be, and so that just bolstered his legend even more.
And now how did Feller handle that? Because I know Feller, from all the barnstorming, was a bit worn out and wasn't pitching optimally that year. Now here comes Satchel Paige with the spotlight on him.
Yeah, Feller was kind of the Indian savior ever since he came on the team in 1936. There was this sense that it was going to be Bob Feller that was going to lead the Indians to their first championship since 1920. It was like a destiny sort of thing. And he comes back from the war in 1946 and has probably what is his best season. He breaks the major league record for strikeouts in a year. He wins 26 games. Then he does kind of tire himself out barnstorming. He gets a little injured. And in 1948, he is not only suffering through his worst season in the majors, he's not even at 500 pitching by the time the All-Star game comes around, but he's being booed mercilessly, not only across the league, but in Cleveland. Fans are growing a little bit impatient with him because they feel like this is their year to do it, and Feller is the one that is kind of prohibiting that. In fact, I think you could say that if Bob Feller had been pitching up to his strength that year, maybe Bill Veeck wouldn't have felt such urgency to bolster the pitching ranks. In a way, the fact that Bob Feller was having such a subpar year was what allowed Paige to really get into the league. And so he is suddenly not the the focus of the pitching staff anymore for the first time since he was 17. And I think that it's just that year was such a hard year for him. He says that he quit reading newspapers. He became really sort of curt, not only with his family, but with reporters. It was a struggle for him until the very end when he has a tremendous September and really helps the Indians get into the World Series.
I sense some irony there, though, because, again, here's Feller, and he was always the attraction. And, as you said, if he was pitching up to standard, do we not see Satchel Paige? And I think readers of the book will, get the why of that answered because, again, you kind of go into that, just that crossover, really, really in depth. And then obviously Feller's rebound, to get them to the 48 World Series, which, spoiler alert, the Indians do, wind up winning. And so, you say this is the World Series that changed baseball. What are a few things that you think changed going forward for baseball after, this team has this amazing performance, wins the American League, does it with Larry Doby, does it with Satchel Paige, and then, Veeck kind of masterminding the whole thing. What does this put in motion for baseball going forward?
Well, I think that you have to kind of put it into the context of what happened during the first 2 years since Major League Baseball integrated. In 1947, you had several black players make it from the Negro Leagues into Major League Baseball. Larry Doby really struggles in 1947. He only gets 5 hits throughout a half a season. He bats 156. He looks really overmatched, nervous, and sort of not ready to be in the major leagues. And you could say a lot about the other players that made it, whether on the St. Louis Browns or also on the Dodgers. So it kind of looks like Jackie Robinson, who had a really good year in 1947, was exceptional. That he was, like a lot of people that were skeptical about integration, could tell themselves, well, Jackie Robinson is the exception here. Everyone else is not quite ready. But then Doby has this tremendous turnaround from 1947 to 1948. It's like he is a different person, and it's evident right when he comes into spring training. Lou Boudreau, who's the player manager of the Indians, is just looking at him and being like, where was this guy last year? He battles his way onto the roster, and it's really, I mean, you can sort of look at quotes in the newspapers from that season. Boudreau, Veeck, other people are really saying the difference with the Indians this year is Larry Doby. If we didn't have him, we would not have won the pennant. We probably would have even been in 4th place. And so it's through integration that the Indians finally get over the hump and get past the Red Sox and the Yankees, teams that had not integrated and not allowed themselves that advantage. And so after the World Series is done in 1948, the Boston Braves, whom the Indians played that year, are sort of looking at their roster and being like, integration gave them such a leg up that you're going to see players from the Negro Leagues during spring training the next year because we need to field that competitive advantage as well. Now, as you know, it's not quite like that. It seemed like at the end of 1948 that was going to be the conclusion that a lot of teams should have logically come to, that the reason the Indians win is primarily because they integrated their roster. But it does take quite a while after that for teams to finally, get to it. And the reasons are varied. Some of them having to do with sort of prejudices and whatnot. But it does kind of show the what can be accomplished through what Veeck did and by integrating the Indians.
And then so now, how did this affect the Negro Leagues? Because, I realized that something we kind of skipped over here was, they had to purchase Doby from the Newark Eagles. And so how did that work out? How much did they wind up paying the Newark Eagles? Because I know that oftentimes when players were signed, their Negro League teams maybe didn't get paid. And, after 1948, there was this really seismic shift in the Negro Leagues as they started to contract very quickly. So how did really Doby signing, kind of almost spell the end, for the Negro Leagues? Because it started to go pretty quickly after that.
I think that was exactly it. It does kind of spell the end of the Negro Leagues. You can sort of, Eppa Manley was the co-owner of the Newark Eagles, which is the team that Larry Doby played for. There are letters and papers that she left that you can access in the Newark Public Library.
They're wonderful.
And yeah, they're excellent. And you can see the letters that she's writing to her husband, Abe Manley, the other co-owner. And this was at the time that Branch Rickey is poaching a pitcher named Don Newcomb from their team, who would eventually, of course, become a Cy Young winner for the Dodgers. But she is sort of writing, and this is before, Jackie has even played for the Montreal minor league team, and she's saying that if this is how it's going to be, if major league teams are just going to kind of swoop in and take our best players, then we're just not going to have a team anymore. And that proved to be prescient. She does sell Larry Doby to the Indians for $15,000, which seems like kind of a high sum for them, but Manley knew that a player of Doby's caliber should be worth 3 to 4 times that. Similarly, Veeck does purchase Satchel Paige from the Kansas City Monarchs, and after that, you start getting more and more sort of players going to the major leagues. Not only was it that they were taking their best players, but the black press at that time, which was very sort of instrumental in writing about the Negro Leagues and sort of the games and the players and whatnot, start shifting more and more of the attention to the major leagues, particularly the clubs with black players on them. And so the Negro Leagues gets less and less press, which causes fewer and fewer fans to want to go see Negro League games. More and more fans start wanting to go to see the Dodgers, the Indians, eventually the Giants, things like this. And it's a devastating sort of financial blow to the Negro League teams, so much so that by the time the 1948 World Series comes along, Eppa Manley attends that World Series and is basically knows that she's just going to have to sell the team. It is not financially viable anymore.
Right, and I think they moved to Houston, and then it was or New Orleans, right? And then it was very quick for the Newark Eagles. So again, we're speaking with Luke Epplin, author of Our Team: The Epic Story of Four Men and the World Series that Changed Baseball. A lovely photo of Satchel and Larry Doby on the cover with the 48 Indians team photo. I guess last bit, looking at the two of them on the cover, there is that dynamic of that huge age gap. Between Doby and Paige at the time. What kind of support system, if any, did they provide for each other, being that there was this, large gap, and Paige was this world-traveled veteran who's seen it all, and Doby's still kind of trying to wake up to the, harsh realities of segregation, having grown up, up here in the Northeast?
Yeah, Doby is from New Jersey, or at least he went to high school in New Jersey, and that's where he lived in the off-season. Larry Doby, when he came to the Cleveland Indians, he was pretty adamant that he felt lonely and isolated. And at that time, he was either sort of shunted to separate accommodations if he couldn't stay in the same hotel as his white major league teammates, or even if he was in the same hotel, he didn't have a roommate like most people did at that time, because the practice of a white teammate and a black teammate rooming together just wasn't done. So he was used to an environment on the Newark Eagles that was of great camaraderie and companionship, and sort of talking about your failures and successes and things like that after games and getting them out of the system. Instead, he was going back to a hotel room where he was just by himself, and you can sort of read the black press at the time in particular, and Doby is leaking to them about how lonely and isolated he is, so much so that he even says at one point that he wishes he was back on the Newark Eagles. So he spends basically an entire year wishing and pining for a teammate that he can sort of talk to about all of this abuse and sort of rough times that he is going through. What he gets instead is Satchel Paige, who's 17 years older than him. It'd be like if your dad walked in or something like that. I mean, Paige is old enough to be his dad. And they were just not only men of different generations, but they were men who had very different ideas about how to carry oneself. Larry Doby was sort of in the sort of practice that Jackie Robinson was at the time, where you did not talk back to umpires or teammates, that you tried to present yourself as dignified and sort of a model player and things like that. And Satchel Paige was somebody who missed team buses, trains, planes, sometimes didn't even show up to the ballpark if it was raining. just kind of acted on his own, gave very quippy responses to interviewers and to, his teammates, was thought of as rather funny. And Doby thought that this was undignified and not the way that black players should try to represent themselves. And so they came from different eras with very different sort of ideologies and worldviews that clashed. And so they did not get along very well.
And I can see that, like you said, from not only the personality standpoint, but from the age difference. But still, they kind of had to work someone in tandem to help the team along, at least on the field, right? I don't think they were necessarily adversarial off the field. Like you said, there was just this huge kind of cultural gap, in between the two of them, during that time.
In fact, they worked extremely well together on the field. There were several games you can see where Satchel Paige is pitching tight games, and Larry Doby is the one who's driving in the runs and making incredible catches in center field. They were incredible 1-2 tandem on the field. Yes,
and I think my only thing is I wish I could have seen them play. Right, I'd spoken to Monty Irvin, and Monty had played with Larry on the Newark Eagles, and they were actually both infielders at the time. And he would tell me they had some plays up the middle. If one was on the ground, they'd backhand the ball out of the glove to turn double plays. He said, it was just something you had to see, but it was just something we could do. And I wish we all really had a chance to watch this team play, and as well as those players, and to see Feller pitch. And I think your book brings us very close to it, because of the depth and the pictures that you paint throughout it. And anyone who's a baseball fan really should go pick up this book, because it captures this very critical point in the sports history of the integration aspect, but also all of these factors coming together to help produce a championship for Cleveland, a town that was starved for one, and took a long time to get back to their, I should say, its former glory. Luke, if people want to pick up the book and reach out to you, what's the best way to get in touch, and where do you want them to pick up the book?
Well, I'm on Twitter, and if you click on my name there, I believe I'm at Luke Epplin. My email address is in my bio, so if you have questions or want to talk to me about the book, I'm right there. You can get a signed copy of the book through my neighborhood bookstore. I live in Astoria, New York, and so it's Astoria Bookshop, and I believe it's just astoriabookshop.org, and that they're selling signed copies exclusively through there.
Well, wonderful. Always go and support local. I had an interesting conversation with a friend about that yesterday, but I think supporting local is a theme. And, Luke, I talked to you throughout this whole process, doing it, on Twitter, little quips, and, we've traded information, and I'm glad that you were able to, get this together. How long did it take you to do the book? Because I feel like we were talking about it for quite a while.
It took about 5 years, and that's just because I'd never done a book before. It took me a while to learn how to do the research process. And then I really wanted to, as you said, kind of make this book feel like fans were there. So I wanted to tell it in almost like a novelistic sort of way. And so that sort of writing took me a long time to not only learn how to do, but then how to apply it. I had to research a lot of details to get that writing right. So 5 years.
Well, it's a wonderful effort, and Luke, I'm really glad that you did it, and I appreciate you for joining us today on the podcast.